for a speck of volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific.
We stopped in a column and got out to take a smoke break. It was an incredible sight. There were probably 400 or 500 Japanese bodies laid out in rows. The Japanese had been dragging them back all this way and lining them up. It was a horrible stench and a really shocking sight to us. We realized we were really putting the hurt on them at that point.
During the Iwo Jima campaign, U.S. Marine tank crews played an often forgotten but crucial role. For thousands of Marines, the story began aboard ship, just days away from what would become known as Operation Detachment.
Dear Mom and all, you probably won't get this letter for a long time. It'll be held up until the forthcoming operation is well underway. We're aboard a ship going back into combat. I was glad to get aboard ship. It's clean, and you always get good chow just before a battle. The name of the vehicle I'm now driving is Cape Town 43.
Corporal Wayman Whitfield's new tank, Cape Town 43, was a part of C Company 4th Tank Battalion, one of 3 tank battalions totaling over 150 tanks to serve on Iwo Jima. Like thousands of other Marines, he said his farewells in a hurried letter before the invasion.
This will probably be my last letter for a long time, so don't worry about me, and I'll write it my first chance. Say hello to everyone for me. All of my love. Your devoted son, Wayman.
For 2 days, U.S. Navy warships maintained an intense bombardment on Japanese defenses around the island's lone peak of Mount Suribachi. The ferocity of the attack and the limited amount of return fire fueled speculation that the tanks would not be needed on the island.
We thought the Japanese defenders would be wounded or dazed. The infantry would go in there and mop up in 3 or 4 days and wouldn't need any armor.
But when the first waves of Marines did land on the Iwo beaches, it quickly became obvious that the Japanese were hardly neutralized. They had only withdrawn deep into the island's honeycomb of bunkers and caves, riding out the preparatory bombardment. Pinned down by deadly fire in their beach positions, the infantry put out a desperate call to the tank crews. The first tank companies were loaded aboard LSM landing ships and hurriedly launched toward the beaches. As the vessels attempted to land, they were battered by heavy surf and endless rounds of Japanese artillery fire. Bob Neiman was Wayman Whitfield's company commander.
The ship is catching hell. Only one thing saved it from being sunk. It was so thin-skinned that the Japanese shells would go in one side and out the other before they would explode. It was a very frustrating experience. Tanks were needed ashore, but we couldn't get ashore.
Radio correspondent Dick Mawson also described the scene.
There are several of these amphibious landing craft coming in for landing with us at this time, and as these ships moved in toward the beach, they drew quite a bit of fire. So the tanks that were landed earlier this morning were bogged down in soft sand. We don't know just what sort of a reception we're going to have when we get in there, although we have a pretty good idea. These artillery and mortars that are edging the beach there on the high spots of ground to the north and south ends of the beach lay down a rather effective screen.
After hours of frustrating and costly attempts to land the tanks, the first Shermans finally rolled onto the beaches.
When we first rolled off the LSM, the only thing I could see was through my periscope. Then, we began to see wounded and dead Marines on the beach, and we knew it wasn't a John Wayne movie. It was for real.
What many thought would take only 3 or 4 days turned into a bloodbath that lasted well over a month. For the infantrymen, the tank crews were lifesavers. Because of the lack of any vegetation or other natural cover, the men often depended on the tanks to bail them out when they became pinned down by heavy gunfire.
Hoppy, this is Bob. Watch those infantrymen in front of you now if they don't get the muzzle blast. Be very careful of that. This is Congo to Fred and all vehicles. Cease firing. Do not fire any more rounds now unless you see enemy opening up. The infantry wish to go forward and do not want us to fire. Roger by platoon.
Dislodging the Japanese from their deep network of caves proved to be a challenging assignment for the tankers. For this job, specially modified Shermans proved invaluable. The tank dozer was often credited as the most effective armored vehicle on Iwo. It used a heavy blade to smash and bury cave openings, sealing the enemy inside. Flamethrower tanks, nicknamed Satans or Zippos by the Marines, were also extensively used, dispersing a fiery napalm mixture to incinerate the Japanese inside their caves and strongpoints. While their role was limited, they were a source of fear to the enemy. At the height of the battle, the flame tanks were unleashing 10,000 gallons of napalm a day. Mixing the fuel fell to the maintenance men who worked round the clock to repair damaged tanks and keep them armed and fueled.
What we did when we weren't busy operating the retriever was to mix the glop, as we called it, with stuff they used for the flamethrower tanks. We fixed that stuff by the 55-gallon barrel, several of them, every day.
Finally, through a desperate team effort, the infantrymen and the tank crews managed to root out all major pockets of Japanese resistance. During one of these battles, Wayman Whitfield's Cape Town 43 was attempting to rescue the crew of another Sherman that had been disabled by a mine. Whitfield's company commander described what happened next in a letter to the young Marine's mother.
It was during the second week of fighting that your son's tank was leading the attack against enemy positions on the central airfield when it struck a powerful mine. The force of the explosion was so great that your son and 3 of the remaining 4 men were killed instantly, while the 5th man was blown from the tank.
Whitfield's Cape Town 43 was one of 32 Marine tanks knocked out around Iwo's central airfield that day. In all, 47 tanks were written off as total losses during the campaign, one of the highest numbers for any battle in the Pacific. For his acts of heroism, Wayman Whitfield was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star. He was buried with full military honors. One of Wayman's best friends also wrote a letter of condolence to his mother.
I know how you must feel about Whit and his death, but you mustn't let it get you down. There were many of us that would have given our lives to have him alive, but I don't think he wanted it that way. You could tell by the way he talked and looked at you, and the way he let his hair grow long. I think he knew he was gonna die, and that's why he kept going up all the time, so it would be him instead of someone else. He was a man well worth being proud of.
This is an epitaph that could well apply to every one of the U.S. tankers who gave their lives during the Second World War. For despite the vast transformations in combat during the 20th century, machines did not dominate the battlefields of World War II. Instead, it was the men in the machines who made the difference between defeat and victory.